one person's psyche or one person's nervous system might respond to the exact same intervention that causes one person trauma. The
Mm,
other person might actually be really healed by this
mm,
intervention. And when we are talking in a one-to-many format, like a TikTok or a reel or a book, you can't actually fine-tune the advice that you're giving to the individual. So the
yeah.
advice that really might heal and help 20% of people flourish might do nothing for another 50% and actually might make shit worse for a remaining 30%.
Today's guest is someone who's lived many lives, from a childhood magician performing at age 6 to a nationally recognized speaker and executive coach, and now to a licensed therapist helping people heal, grow, and come home to themselves. Jason Connell has worked with everyone from Fortune 100 leaders to people navigating deep trauma, and what ties it all together is his ability to blend insight, presence, and heart. He's not just about transformation, he's lived it. Today, we dive into the moments that have shaped him, the power of self compassion, and what it really takes to live a meaningful, aligned life. Jason, welcome to the show. We appreciate you being here today with us.
So glad to be here. Thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Have started using Fridays more for reflection and administrative work, and that has been a huge win for me.
Yeah,
Did it
yeah.
used to
Be
be
able.
like did it used to be like a Monday to Friday type of schedule?
For the vast majority of my life, I worked Monday to Friday or Monday to Saturday.
Mm.
And then it was a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit more. Well, 2.5 years ago, I set a goal of moving to a 4-day work week as a clinician. And then a year and a half ago, I actually achieved that. And it is like totally, it's a privilege to be able to do that. And it is the best thing ever. Highly recommended for anyone that can even flirt with switching to a 4-day work week to doing it.
Mm. All right, let's get into it. I got a lot of questions. Caleb as well. The first one because it like immediately caught my eye that you went from a magician to a speaker to a therapist. I guess like a path most wouldn't expect that transition. Just out of curiosity, I was just wondering like what those sort of like career pivots taught you about trusting yourself when you were going through these changes.
Wow, that was a good question. So I'm a meditator. I started meditating daily when I was 23, and I'm nearly 40 now. So it's been a very long-term habit for me. And I have found, and I think this is true for most people, I found that if you actually spend a little bit of time, it doesn't even have to be at the day to day, it could be at the week to week or even month to month, checking in with yourself. And if you are honest with yourself, which is deceptively difficult. Like I spent a year where my goal was to tell zero lies, and it wasn't that difficult to be honest with the people around me. I mean, hard, but comparatively, it was way harder to be honest with myself. So, what I have learned is that if you're committed to honesty and if you're willing to slow down, check in with yourself and reflect, that you basically can't miss your path, whether that's changing careers like you just referenced, or finding your long-term partner, or finding your best friends, or figuring out what city to live in. So, to some degree, at this point, 5 or 6 years into my current career, what I've learned is all you have to do is get out of your way. That's maybe easier said than done, but that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned.
I have a question. As someone, I've tried to meditate before, and it's one of those things. Maybe for a couple days or even a week, I'll be able to do it. But eventually, it fades away. I have a real difficult time sticking with it. Do you have any insight into maybe making it a little bit more? I don't know if easy is the word, but something that is easier to follow consistently day in, day out. Like,
Yeah, totally. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?
yeah, of course.
So, what were your motivations for meditating?
I started going to therapy a couple years ago, and through that, we discussed that meditation might be a good idea, just to help try to regulate my thoughts and calm my body in the morning. So that was the initial, I guess, start to it, and it's just been like a stop and go like type of thing. It has not been consistent since I started it.
Nice. I'll come right back to meditation. I love that you shared that you've been to therapy or you're going to therapy. Me
Okay.
too. I became a therapist because I got really good therapy, and we need more people, and it's,
Hmm.
I hope it's okay to say, more men, especially talking
Yep.
about this. There's a huge, huge, huge mental health crisis globally, and we're sort of viscerally aware of that, but men still are not talking about it. And I serve primarily men,
Hmm.
and we need to normalize it. So kudos for that disclosure. Really appreciate it. Um, so you're going to therapy, and you and your therapist have decided, hey, you might benefit from meditation. How long were you trying to meditate for?
Like during a specific meditation period, about
Yeah, exactly.
10 minutes or so.
So there's kind of, if you meditate enough, there's something about the mind that I think is pretty universal starts to become clear. And that is that the mind does not like to be tamed. And the mind is not consistently good at doing what is good for it. So there's kind of two things here. One, we need to put it on easy mode. I mean, sitting and trying to focus on your breath for 10 minutes is incredibly difficult. I mean, a lot of teachers will indicate that that's maybe where you should start. Some teachers say 45 minutes. I don't really think anyone can actually start with 45 minutes or even 10. So when I was 23, I started with 1 minute a
Okay.
day. And at that point, I was really oriented towards habits. So I was keeping track of how many days that I was getting and slowly but surely increasing the amount of time that I was meditating. And when I work with my clients, I'm a licensed therapist, but when I went back to grad school, I also spent 2.5 years doing an intensive and teaching meditation in Eastern
Hmm.
psychology. When I work with my clients in developing meditation, we start with 1 minute per day. And at its heart, meditation's aim is to sort of change our relationship to our mind. And there's this book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And there was this little line that really unlocked quite a bit for me. It said, we meditate because that's what we're supposed to do, not because we want to, not because we're going to get benefits, but because we need to. We don't really pay attention to if the mind wants to or not. So you combine a super achievable goal, 1 minute a day, with rewards, sort of habit tracking or whatever you're going to use, with this attitude of, I'm going to do this whether I want to or not. And then also like a huge amount of compassion for yourself because it's a notoriously difficult habit to entrench. And these days, I aim for 30 to 60 minutes a day, every day. But some days that does not fit with my life or my temperament. And I'll just aim for one. So the minimum for me, or I think anyone that's going down this path, should just be 1 minute, 1 minute per day. So I try it that way.
So it's almost the best that you can do for that given day. Like some days you can get up to 60, but other days maybe just life happens or you're not in the right headspace and whatever. So it's just whatever you can do for that particular day.
Well said. Exactly.
Okay. And you've mentioned that there is a mental health crisis going on for sure across the entire world. I think that might be an understatement. I don't know if the word crisis maybe gets to the point enough. And I noticed all through my university, I found myself going back to the topic of mental health a lot. So if I could write on it or make videos about it or whatever, it was always something that was of interest to me. I was just curious through your career changes when you went from being a coach to being a therapist, was there a specific moment or multiple moments over a period of time where you think maybe I need to get into the therapy space? Maybe that is where my calling is. Was it over a long period of meditation or whatever it could have been?
Yeah, there was a specific moment. Well, in one hand, I knew when I was 12. So a common thing that I see with my own clients is they're very successful, but they're miserable, and they start renegotiating what they want to do with their life.
Mm,
And one of the first questions I ask is, did you know what you wanted to do when you were a kid? And it's not always on the nose for people, but there's often a really good hint. Or alternatively, it sounds like you've just known. So in one regard, I knew when I was 12. If you asked me when I was 12 years old, which is kind of when my career as a magician was taking off, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would have said psychologist.
mm,
I'm a therapist. There's a little bit of a difference, but what I wanted to do was perform psychotherapy. So I knew when I was 12, and then life got in the way. I got totally distracted. And when I was a speaker consultant, I knew I wanted to get off stage and I knew I wanted to shift to mental health because I had gotten so much from that, so much meaning in my own life, and I wanted to share it with others. And I had raised a couple $1 million for my own startup. There was going to be kind of like a spa for people's mental health. I still think it's a really cool idea. I still hope someone builds it. I will be the first customer or the first subscriber if anyone ever builds that. And I was on a meditation retreat, 3-day retreat here in the Rocky Mountains, and it hit me very, very, very clearly in the silence that um, I want to be a practitioner. I want to be a provider of mental health care services. I don't want to be a business person. So I left the retreat, and there's that moment of clarity where I knew, but then it took, weeks to sort of build the courage and own it, and eventually sort of return the money to the investors, busted out like pen and paper so that I could start scratching out the notes on a grad school application, called professors from 15 years prior when I was an undergrad and got them to write references and went back to school.
Was there some type of comfort once you started to realize that therapy was what you really wanted to do, even though you still had to fill out applications, you had to do all of the work to get into the school, and then there were all that studying that had to be put in to get you to being a licensed therapist. Was there still a comfort knowing that that was what you wanted to do?
I can't help but that's such a, I will answer your question. That's such a perceptive question. What makes you ask that?
Because I'm just relating this to my own life. Recently, I've opened up my own business here, and it's very, yeah, it's very, thank you. It's very stressful, but at the same time, I heard this quote that how lucky am I to be tired and stressed in the pursuit of something I chose to do, something that I get to do, right? And so I have been stressed, and obviously, you got to find the clients, you got to do all of this stuff. There's all of the administrative work and whatnot, but still, at the end of the day, I'm doing the thing that I chose, and I
Yeah,
know a lot of people don't get that opportunity, so there is a comfort in knowing that.
yeah, yeah. Love that. So my experience was similar. On one hand, so if you think about like your wisest self versus like your small self. On one hand, my wisest self knew for sure. There was a very clear sense of truth of this is what I'm supposed to be doing, at least right now.
Mhm.
And there's like a deep relaxation, a deep comfort around that. And then my small self really went kicking and screaming. I mean, I went from at the peak, I had a team of 14 people in my consultancy, and then my as a speaker, I was able to sell at auditoriums in multiple continents. And I was going to go back to grad school to be an unpaid intern
Mm,
and very, very, very different
yeah.
lifestyle. Grad school is a huge pain in the ass, at least it was for me. And my deep self totally knew this is right for you, man. Do this, do this, do this. But the part of me that so often meets the world, my small self, really hated it. So the comfort was there, but I was mostly focused on the discomfort.
Mm,
You brought me to something I've been thinking a lot about and working with myself. And once I have a little bit more mastery, I'll do my best to help clients. There's this upper limit problem where we often give ourselves this artificial sense of you can have this much happiness, or you can have this much money, or you can have this much love, or you can have this much joy, or whatever. And if you start succeeding in one area, you might start sabotaging in another area,
mm,
which is to some degree what I was doing. I was
mm,
sitting there with this deep clarity of my path and what I ought to be doing, and then making it so difficult for myself. So lately in my own personal practice, when I notice the stressors or the anxiety or the shame or whatever alive in my life, alive in my system, I'll kind of stay with it. I'll notice it in my body. And then I'll ask myself the question, what really good thing is this difficult emotion preventing me from feeling?
yeah.
And then inevitably there's an answer. So when I was a grad student or going back to grad school, the really good thing that all this stress and anxiety was preventing me from feeling was getting on my path and really living a more fully expressed version of myself. But I was so captivated by the small sense or the small self that I couldn't access it.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
In previous episodes, actually like the most previous episode of this, we touched on like the power of no and how rewarding it can be when you say or like reject something that you don't feel like align with your values. And I feel like as someone who has stepped away from certain things career wise, do you feel like because you kind of touched on like you kind of knew, like you said, at like 12 years old, like, oh, this is kind of sort of what I want to do. But is there like a moment, maybe when you were talking to someone, that you felt like it like clicked, like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, like this was my calling all along, type of feeling?
Let me just sit with that for a sec. So there was certainly the moment in the meditation retreat that I mentioned. That was a really vivid one. But there's also a million other little moments along the way that I've learned to pay attention to. Um, Carl Jung, the psychologist or psychologist, yeah, uh, used to call these synchronicities, where you get a little wink from the universe that they might actually just be a coincidence, but you get a little wink from the universe that sort of feels like in the body or feels like sometimes in the mind that you're on the right path. A very common example is you're thinking of someone and they call you. But when those synchronicities start to line up in your life, to me, it becomes very clear moment by moment. Ah, this is my path. I think the other moments are, for me personally, are, I moved into mental health because I got good mental health care and I'm still tending to my mental health, though it's way better than I ever imagined possible. And some of the moments that are most vivid to me are when I'm up in the shit and everything's miserable and clients are being difficult and like my accountant's messed up my taxes or whatever. And I check in with myself and it's like, no, I'd love to do this. I still love doing this at its core. And those moments, especially met by the synchronicities that inevitably seem to come if you're willing to push through resistance and push past the pain points, are insanely affirming to me.
Mm,
I think there's a message there because a lot of people with mental health sometimes think that, okay, if I go to counseling for 12 times, I'll be fixed and then I'll be good to go and then I'll never need to come back ever again. But it's the same thing as going to the dentist or going to your family doctor.
Yes, yes.
You got to go get checked, even if you're not going once a week. Maybe you go once a year, and you just go in and you take a little. You register. Okay, yeah, no, that's okay. My financials are good. No, maybe I'm a little stressed with my family, and then you can address that. I know personally, I have people in my life who have unfortunately not gotten that help until they're in the crisis. And so now there's a lot more work that needs to be done because you're in it. Now we have to somehow help get you out of it and then also address why you were in it in the first place, which I think can be a very difficult thing to do as opposed to getting rid of the stigma so people can just go all the time, even if they don't necessarily think that they need it right now. Right?
Yeah, totally, totally. My position's a little bit different because I use my awareness to support other
Mm,
people in deepening their own awareness or deepening their own mental health. But I'm on a daily basis, whether it's through meditation or journaling or exercise, tending to my mental health. I'm always sort of in a check-in pattern with my therapist, meditation teacher, or both. And then I'm getting married in August, and the lead up to that, and I am publishing a book next year, and the lead up to that brought up a ton of shit for me.
mhm.
And in those moments, I went back to my therapist in a more regular cadence, once a week for a little while, and then every other week, because I needed the support. And a lot of people without that support, myself included, if I let go of all the things that I did for my mental health, oh my God, it'd be an absolute wreck. It would be a
Yeah.
total, but with a little bit of support, whether it's checking with a therapist or meditation or privileging sleep, it becomes kind of easy for me to be flourishing and be abundant. And I think you're pointing at that same thing of, hey, let's have safeguards. Let's treat
Yeah.
our mental health the way we treat our hygiene or the way we treat our
Mhm.
physical health or the way we treat our sleep.
Is there as self-help and therapy has become more popular, I think, especially on social media, is there any advice or any like trendy things that you see that frustrate you that seem that they're only blowing up because I don't know that they just seem like a hot topic, but in reality, it's like, well, actually, I don't know if that's gonna benefit a wide range of people.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, it's much more gift than curse that mental health has become
Yes,
mainstream. I'm
yes,
so grateful for that.
100%.
And the psyche and the nervous system, that's what we're sort of working with behind closed doors in psychotherapy. Um, one person's psyche or one person's nervous system might respond to the exact same intervention that causes one person trauma the
Mm,
other person might actually be really healed by this
mm,
intervention. And when we are talking in a one-to-many format, like a TikTok or a reel or a book, you can't actually fine-tune the advice that you're giving to the individual. So the
yeah,
advice that really might heal and help 20% of people flourish might do nothing for another 50% and actually might make shit worse for a remaining 30%. So the lack of discernment that comes sort of baked into the medium, I think is a little bit challenging.
yeah,
Also, it's like the popularization of terms like narcissism and gaslighting, on one hand, that's quite helpful. On the other hand, it's like 90% of the time I hear either one of those terms, the person is not saying what those words mean. And then the last thing, and I'll get off my soapbox here, we look at things like narcissism or borderline personality or bipolar, which have become sort of diagnostics that lay people are making of their friends or their ex-girlfriends or whatever. And we treat them as fixed personality traits. My deeply held belief is that flourishing mental health is available to everyone, and
mhm,
that things that appear to be untreatable static traits of one's personality, like narcissism, as it's often considered in the mainstream,
yeah.
are actually just complicated manifestations of trauma. And if you have the right trauma specialist, you'll be able to transform that.
I
Um,
think that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Nev.
I had a question just because so I was like born I was born in Pakistan, which is in South Asia, and then I moved here pretty early on, and I feel like in places especially like South Asia, like India, Pakistan, a lot of those places. I don't want to speak for other countries, but I feel like there's a this whole topic of mental health is very foreign, especially with the generations that have raised me. Like if I talk to my parents or my grandparents about this notion of mental health, my parents might like somewhat understand it, but it's still foreign. My grandparents would just say, "You're fine." Like that. Like I feel like that's a very common response that you would receive. It's like, "Are you physically okay?" Okay, then I don't see what the problem is. Like I can't see that there's anything wrong. So then, I guess have you ever faced instances where you're talking to like an older generation where you're trying to explain the importance of mental health? Because I feel like I feel like new generations are a little better because there's more resources available and you're taught in school like, oh, there's always someone to call. But I feel like these generations, the older ones, they didn't really grow up with that, so they don't see it as something that people are affected with.
Totally, totally. I will answer that question, but I'm curious, what's been your experience? What's worked there, if
Um,
anything?
so like I have an older brother who is very open about speaking about mental health. And I know that a lot of these conversations, whenever we would try to bring it up with those that are close to us, that are a little bit older, they'd always be sort of rejected. So I know, like, if there was ever resources that we would need, it would be resources that we'd have to access externally for the most part rather than like internally. Like it's kind of hard to have conversations with people to their defense that like didn't really know what it was growing up. So um, I guess if there was like advice you would give to that generation that could sort of like help them explain like why this is important, just because I feel like a lot of people are like, if I see my parents not talk about it and they think it's foreign, I don't feel like I'm like, I feel like there's something wrong with me. Like, oh, they don't feel it. Why do I feel it?
Really good question, really good observation. What comes to mind is something that a friend of mine said recently. He said, the first generation works with their hands so that the second generation can work with their heads, so that the third generation can work with their hearts. And yeah, I really loved that. And Um, I think, not to be presumptuous about either of you, but I think the three of us have the privilege of working with our hearts.
Yeah,
Uh, Now, I don't like this feature of modernity, but right now, as it stands, working on our mental health is a privilege. It's not something that everyone has the chance to do. I really think it ought to be a right, like water, like food, like physical safety.
yeah,
So, to some degree, when I'm speaking to the older generation and they think that what I'm doing or what we're doing is fluff or they don't understand it, personally, inside myself, I meet that with compassion. I think, oh, wow, it's sad that this wasn't in their lifetime available to them. And it's lucky that it's within mine. Um, if I'm feeling a little bit more feisty, I might ask them how they manage their moods or how they navigate the difficulties of life. But the deepest thing is we invest in our mental health first for ourselves. all of us yearn for approval from our family. All of us yearn for approval from our in close people. Many of us yearn for approval from random people, the person that
Mhm.
checks us out at Trader Joe's. That's how we're wired. And to some degree, we have to come back into our own heart and realize even if people don't understand this, this is for me and I'm doing this for me. And there's this beautiful ripple effect. I saw it in my own family and I see it in my own system of friends and I see it at work all the time, where if one variable in a broader equation changes and changes for the better, that often ripples through to all the other variables in that equation. I mean, a very, very, very simple example is um, I started drinking alcohol probably when I was 16 or whenever I could first get my hands on it.
Mhm.
But I my entire life would take 1 month a year off of drinking. And I would just sort of talk about it. I wouldn't force anyone else to do it. I wouldn't shame them for not doing it. But I noticed in my 20s, sort of in undergrad and beyond, some of my closest friends started doing that.
Mhm.
And then more recently in my 30s, I just gave up alcohol. And I noticed some of my friends doing that. So I actually think the best thing we can do is meet the people who aren't open to this with understanding and compassion, and then invest deeply in our health and trust that what we're doing for us will ripple through to the people that we love.
I love that. Um, I also like what you said about the like I got goosebumps when you talked about the generation and how it like got the second generation learns with their head and then the third one learns with their heart. That's a
Yeah.
really cool quote. Um,
Isn't that beautiful?
yeah, I'm definitely gonna take that and use that somewhere else.
Please. Well, my friend that told me that is from India and he's first generation. So
Okay,
you guys originate from similar ancestral geography.
yeah. Um, I was reading that you've also touched on this topic of like authentic confidence, which I think is really cool because I don't hear the word authentic confidence often. Like it's just like oh that this person's confident, that person's confidence. I'm curious to know if there were any like preconceived notions that you feel like people were spreading about confidence that you were like, no, I want to call the term authentic confidence because this is truly what confidence is versus what other people are convincing themselves.
I love that question. I, as a magician and as a speaker, had this sort of some of this is just a gift. I did nothing to earn this. Some of it I've worked to refine. But I have this sort of like weird ability to stand on stage without being debilitatingly nervous, like the vast majority of people in this world would be. And that led many, many, many people to believe that I was just this insanely confident human. Um,
Mhm.
and I certainly was not. I mean, just because I could do that one thing, like asking a woman on a date, that was absolutely terrifying to me. Even worse, maybe, is like if somebody said to me, "Hey, where should we go for dinner?" I would be so caught up in people pleasing and trying to give them the answer that they wanted for themselves that I couldn't even connect to where I wanted to go for dinner, even though the answer was almost certainly Chipotle. Um, um, so I realized that there was a huge gap between what people were perceiving as confident and what confidence must actually feel like. When I was working as a speaker, which is when I was spending a huge amount of time sort of working directly with confidence, because speakers often are working with executives and people that require a huge amount of command presence and a huge amount of boldness in this world. The definition that I liked, and I still like this, is that confidence is the ability to let your passion overwhelm your fears.
Mhm.
So you guys have this podcast, and starting something like this takes quite a bit. And you're working in public, which is, I know from direct experience, it's very fucking nerve-wracking. Part of my French, I basically can't help it at this point.
Yeah.
Uh, you're welcome to bleep me or cut that. Um, but there's something in you that's like, you know what? I believe in myself. I believe in the mission. I believe in the benefits from doing this. That's going to help drown out those fears. So that's a definition I really like. More deeply today, though, what strikes me as confident is knowing that I'll be okay no matter what.
Mhm.
Independent of what happens to the external world, I will be okay. And that might also mean leaning on your people. It might mean leaning on your therapist. It might mean leaning on your significant other. It might mean leaning on your best friends to help you put yourself back together while you're feeling broken. So it's my lived experience with having people project, oh man, that guy's confident just because I can do this weird thing most people can't, versus my actual experience of I can't even pick where to go to dinner, let alone make a move.
I relate so much to the thought of I will be okay, even if I get up on stage and I faint or something like that. Like the worst thing, I've shared this story on here before. When I was in high school giving a presentation, I had to run out of the class because I threw up on myself. So yeah, that happened. Obviously, as a 15-year-old boy in the middle of high school, not the best thing to be going through. But I was completely fine. I don't think anyone ever talked about it. Like all my friends, no one was like, ah, look at this idiot who threw up on himself. It was just like, okay, yeah, he got sick or whatever happened. It's a normal thing that you're not the only one who's ever gone through that. And I have a tendency sometimes to put myself in a box like I'm the only person who's ever dealt with anything. That there's been
Mhm.
no there hasn't been 100 billion people who have come before me who have dealt with all sorts of things much worse than I have dealt with. And once I had started thinking like that and consistently carry that, like, okay, this might not be great, but it could be worse and I'll be okay. And that mindset, that switch, I think has really been beneficial.
Beautiful. Yeah, you hit on two things that I think are so wise. There's the thing you said out loud, which is, I'll be okay. Even if I puke in myself in the middle of a presentation, I'll be okay.
Mhm.
And then there's the thing that you said out loud, but maybe a little bit quieter, and that is that um, we're all united in the struggle of like
Mhm.
having a mind, of having a human existence, of dealing with shame and embarrassment. And it's one of these universal truths that you can get to a lot of different ways. Like David Foster Wallace sort of talked about, you'd be surprised to learn how little people think about you. And
Mhm.
when you meditate and your practice deepens, you start to realize that the sensation of being isolated and the sensation of being alone is universal. And then
Mhm.
you sort of spend a little bit more time with that and it melts away and you realize that, oh, this thing that I think is disconnecting me from everyone in the world is actually connecting me to everyone in the world. And I love that you pointed that out.
Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest reasons I wanted to start this podcast is that I got over myself thinking, oh, everyone's going to care that I posted something. The fact is, most people are not going to care that you're posting something. You just post it because you never know. And I sort of look at maybe this will benefit one person. And if it benefits one person, if one person can listen to this and take something away and it can benefit their mental health or their personal life or whatever, because then it's worth it. And I would take shit from 100 people just so that one or two or three people can have that benefit.
Yeah, well said. And the ripple effect is wild. The 100 people that write a nasty comment below the post, they will forget about
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
within minutes, if not less time.
Yep.
The person who heard something that you guys put out there and it helped them, whether it helped them be a little bit more happy or form a better relationship, or sort of brought them off the edge of ending their life, they will remember that forever.
Yeah. I think that yeah, that's definitely the biggest thing that has carried us on through making these episodes is someone could benefit from it. I think Nav, do you have any more questions you want to
I
ask?
do have one. I'm glad that you personally touched on the high school story. Because like just yesterday I was also giving a presentation and my like I thought, doing like we did a podcast, we've done quite a few episodes and it's like I'm working on my communication. I feel like I'm able to deliver my thoughts a little better than I in episode 1. Yet still when I gave a presentation in front of maybe like 30 people, my leg was shaking. And I still have this like for the life of me, I can't present without sweating or just getting really nervous beforehand. I was just wondering for you, like, do you have any like techniques? Because obviously you've publicly spoke quite a few times. Do you have any techniques that you would give to someone who is really nervous about presenting or upcoming interviews or things that are very anxiety inducing?
Totally. I saw a speaker do this, an amateur speaker, when I was like 20 or something, and thought it was so brilliant. And then when I had the consultancy, I was, among other things, training people to build speaking businesses. And what this speaker did is she got on stage and she was shaking and she stuttered a bit and she sort of messed up her opening story. We're like 45 seconds into the speech or something. And she stopped. She sort of shook her head and she just addressed the audience and said, "Forgive me, I'm nervous." And like everybody exhaled. And then since then, I've like, when I am nervous, I'll often just tell people, hey, I'm so happy to be here, and I'm nervous right now. And when I was coaching speakers, I encouraged them just own that. It actually comes back to your other question. I mean, we think of confidence as being bulletproof, but
Mm,
actually, confidence is to some degree measured by our ability to deal with vulnerability. And if you can sit there and say, my leg always shakes, I always sweat while I'm speaking, forgive me. You're being vulnerable and you're saying, I don't need to hide who I am from you. I'm fine here. And
yeah.
I hope you are too. There's a lot in the psyche, my psyche, all of our psyches, that wants reality to be different than it is. And if you really want to get to the heart of things, that causes a huge amount of suffering.
Mm,
In fact, I've heard very wizened meditation teachers say that the Buddha's teachings boil down to that. That whenever we cling to wanting reality to be different than it is, we are causing our own suffering. When we let go of needing reality to be different than it is, own what's happening in the moment and surrender ourselves to the flow, incredible things happen spiritually, psychologically, professionally.
That is such
that's
a unique perspective. I'm over here like picturing my audience still in their underwear, like trying to change my sense of reality so it's easier for me. That's very refreshing to hear, though.
that sounds like the collectiveness that you were mentioning earlier. I think when you say I'm nervous, they're probably nervous too. And that person who has to present after you and that person before you, and especially when you're in a classroom setting and there's other students of any age, they're probably all in their own heads worried about their presentations as well. So I think being able to be confident and vulnerable and say, I'm nervous, but I'm going to do it and I'm going to be fine. That can help everyone. Because everyone's like, oh, he's nervous too? No way. Someone else is actually also shitting their pants right now. That's really cool. Okay, now I can take a breath and relax a little bit. And that can bring everyone together in a way.
And there's a quiet, like psychological thing. You're a million percent right. And is leveraging this quiet psychological thing of suddenly you're relatable. Like
Yes.
everybody can relate to being nervous before a speech or a first date or whatever. And by owning that with a sense of I'll be fine. Like whether the audience boos me off stage or the state goes out with me on a second date, I'll be fine. If you can own that without needing reality to be different, oh my God, not only are you connecting with people, but you become magnetic.
I think that's a perfect way to end off. I think that is absolutely fantastic. It wraps everything up. So, Jason, we thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you being vulnerable and you sharing your story and giving some advice that I hope someone listening can take and apply to themselves. We appreciate it so much. So that's Nav. This is Caleb. You've been watching Life in Moments. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.